record to this computer. Sorry. We'll have to figure out. I think it's recording now. Let me make sure. How can I make sure?
Yes, it is.
It is? Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so that's the plan for today, and it shouldn't take me too long, but I do have a lot of stuff put in here, so I know there will be questions. And also, I've been to Cuba maybe a dozen times since 2005. So if you have any questions about contemporary situations too, I was there last year. Can't go this year. So my first little quote that I want to quote for you here today is, in 1972, the longtime journalist for the New York Times, Herbert Matthews, who was a chronicler of the Cuban Revolution, he wrote about the different options that the United States diplomats might have in approaching Cuba. And he said, no approach to Fidel Castro or Cuba, to the Cuban Revolution, would make sense if it did not, as a pre-existing basis for negotiation, accept his revolution, including its Marxism Leninism and the social transformation of Cuban life. And I thought we'd start there with a little theoretical background of what do we mean by Marxism Leninism? I don't know how much exposure, I'm sure you've had some exposure to this in your curriculum so far. So what does he mean by Marxism Leninism? First, Marxism, of course, Marxism is just more than this, but just a couple of points from the Marxist perspective. It's the historical materialist viewpoint. And Marx really zeroed in on how economies are organized and how that organization in turn determines other social structures and social processes that are going on in a society. So for example, some of the ways that humans have organized their economies, and economies are just how you produce and distribute your goods and services in the society. Sometimes they say, oh, whoops, I have to admit some Danielle there. Okay, sometimes they are hunting and gathering societies, agriculture-based economies, feudalism was one big mode of production. And finally, as the economy shifted in the industrial age, it shifted into market economy or capitalism. And in capitalism, one of the structures that's determined is the class structure. And in capitalism, there's two great classes. One is the huge number of us who sell our labor power to those people who own the means of production, and those people who profit from the productive forces in society. And that we call the capitalist class. The workers who sell their labor power are called the proletariat, or the working class. So Marx was especially brilliant when it comes to criticizing capitalism, the critique of capitalism as a system. And he recognized early on that capitalism, one of the things about capitalism is it is expansive. It's constantly seeking to move out into the world for three purposes. First, to pick up sources of raw materials, like bauxite, for example, cheap labor for production, and finally a market where you can sell your commodities. You can export your commodities back to that market. And of course, you know from your studies that this is basically colonialism. Of course, settler colonialism is a little different when people from the metropolitan imperialist centers go and settle in these areas. But it's for the same purposes, to exploit raw materials, cheap labor for production, and selling commodities. So as Marx and Engels said in Capitalist Manifesto, one of my favorite quotes, they're talking about the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and they say, the need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. And that's really what we're talking about today, is that push for a capitalism to always expand outwards. And it bumped up against something in the Cuban Revolution. And that's what we're talking about. So that's the Marxism part of Marxism and Leninism. And Lenin, of course, was the leader of the Russian Revolution of 1917. And he added to the analysis with his discussion of imperialism. And for him, imperialism is kind of capitalism on steroids. it's in its essence a stage of capitalism, advanced capitalism, when competition diminishes and you have monopolies increasing and you have increasing power of financial institutions like the great big banks of London that you're familiar with, I'm sure, the domination of finance capital, and also germane to our subject today, the division of the world by the great powers, the imperialist powers. He says it's the exploitation of an increasing number of small or weak nations by an extremely small group of the richest and most powerful nations. And this is our global economy today. And some of you may have heard this referred to as the core and the periphery, and Emmanuel Wallerstein's view of global economy. And you might remember Michael Manley had a book, I think in 1979 or 78, called Struggle from the Periphery. And that's what he was talking about, Jamaica and Cuba, the entire Caribbean really, being on the periphery of that global economy, whereas like New York and London are the core. I think you can also hear a little bit of a symbolic reference to how the Caribbean is viewed by the ruling classes in the United States and Europe. In the phrases like in 1983, Ronald Reagan, the American president, had a program that he called the Caribbean Basin Initiative. And I was just writing my dissertation at the time, and I always thought it was really rude and disparaging to use the word basin to describe the Caribbean, which is it's just an insult to me. And they used to call it America's playground or the tourist paradise. That was the Caribbean, as if to define the Caribbean was just to define it in terms of how North Americans would use it, would exploit it, really. So let's talk a little bit about the consequences of imperialism for the nations, the colonized nations. So one of the big consequences is a real utter inability of nation states in the region to really regulate their own, have complete autonomy over their own internal and foreign affairs, really. And there are innumerable instances, which I'm sure you've read about in Caribbean history, with Caribbean national autonomy being reined in by the United States. And of course, because the ruling class of the United States considers the Caribbean its property almost. And this reining in sometimes takes the form of United States Marines landing on the beaches and proceeding to use force to install a new government, or international banks creating dependencies and demanding austerity policies. This happened in Jamaica in the 1970s. Or organizations like the International Republican Institute and the National Endowment for Democracy. These are two state organizations. They're sort of private organizations, but they use U.S. taxpayer money to interfere in politics in the Caribbean. Like they trained a group of Haitians to overthrow President Aristide at one point. And by the way, under Donald Trump, those organizations have twice as much money to pursue their aims as they did before. Okay, so I want to get to so for me, what the real significance of the Cuban Revolution is that it was successful resistance to imperialism. And from 1959 onward, when they won the revolution, Cuba illustrates the challenges and the rewards of that successful resistance to and rejection of imperialism, that fight that's going on with the expansionness of capital. Okay, so Cuban resistance, let's put it in some historical perspective. It really began, as you probably know from your studies already, Cuban resistance began with the wars against Spain that started in 1868 with the 10 Years' War. And then it heated up again in 1895. That's a wonderful period of time, by the way, when Jose Marti was living abroad in Jamaica. And I think Antonio Maceo spent some time in Jamaica as well before the 1895 war. Now, they were both martyrs in that war, as you can see from their dates. And then what happened is, they went back to war against Spain in 1895. And then in 1898, the United States had a huge ship naval ship in the harbor in Havana called the Maine, and the Maine blew up mysteriously. And this on the left, I think oh yeah, you can see my cursor, I think too. This is the monument to the Maine, the martyrs of the Maine. But the Maine blowing up gave the United States an opportunity and an excuse to go in and win the war that Cuba had started against Spain, and really take over that project. You see how Teddy Roosevelt was depicted here in the battle for San Juan Hill, which is another fascinating site in Santiago de Cuba. They have lots of monuments to those soldiers as well that are there. So right after the United States really won that war, they initiated the Platt Amendment in the United States. That gave the United States, by constitutional law, the ability to intervene in all of Cuba's internal affairs. So basically, it took all autonomy away from Cuba and really installed its own hegemony. Then we have, here is imperialism's henchman, Fulgencio Batista. Now, he was a soldier, and he was in charge for a little I can't remember his original dates, but then he, just as Cuba was coming up in 1952 to an election, Batista took control. He just seized control. He wouldn't go into the elections because he knew he was going to lose them. There had been a lot of activity in the University of Havana, among whom were Fidel Castro and his brother, and a number of other young students were very dissatisfied with the way Cuba was going. But Batista again seized control in 1952. You can see the kind of people he surrounded himself with. He was very much Washington's man in Havana. He allowed pretty much the United States to do whatever it would with Cuba. Now, I just have some contrasting images of Cuba under under Batista, and really under U.S. imperialism. So U.S. companies during that period, like United Fruit, set up 20th century plantations in Cuba. They paid workers starvation wages, and they brought all those profits back to the United States, to the owners, American owners. And at the same time, organized crime syndicates, the mafia from the United States, developed hundreds of brothels and casinos in Havana with few restraints that they would have had if they had tried to develop those, and they did develop them, of course, in the United States. But on the eve of the armed struggle against imperialism's henchmen, Batista, Fulgencio Batista, the characteristics, how the country was characterized was poverty, hunger, and illiteracy across the vast majority of the population. And then inside Havana, sort of decadence and a lot of prostitution and gambling and that sort of thing. So then let's jump to July 26th, 1953. Okay, on that date, a handful of revolutionaries from the Federation of University Students, these were students basically, organized about 100 young men and a few young women to attempt to seize control of the weapons stored at the Moncada Barracks, which you can see on the right here. I don't know, can you see the rest of the whole of my screen? There you go. This is the Moncada Barracks in Santiago de Cuba in the eastern part of Cuba. So it was a disastrous failure as a beginning of the armed struggle against Batista. But in the aftermath, Batista's army rounded up about 60 of the rebels, dragged them back to the Moncada Barracks, and many were horribly tortured, dozens were executed, and some were held over for trial, including Fidel Castro. Some of the tortured bodies were strewn about the barracks grounds, as you can see on the left. And they were it was made to look like it was the aftermath of a firefight, but that really didn't fool anybody. This was the first of Batista's bloodbaths. And his regime, over the next 5 years, killed about 20,000 Cubans before the revolution was finally successful in 1959. So, as I said, Fidel Castro was not dragged back to the barracks. Instead, he was put on trial, and he gave a speech at that trial, which I really recommend that you read. It's been translated into many languages. He said in this speech, "You may condemn me, but history will vindicate me." And this is something that is just a classic Fidel Castro line. By the way, on the here's another admit here. On the right here is Fidel on, I believe, January 8th or 9th of 1959, when the rebels came victoriously, rode back to Havana from the east. And he gave his first addresses to the crowds in Havana after the revolution was successful. Once the revolution was won, the US government really, here's where we get the pushback from imperialism. The US began a relentless campaign of propaganda, sabotage, diplomatic isolation, and assassination for the next 60 years. Some attacks are covert, like sabotage the State Department engaged in under the Obama administration, and the CIA's numerous attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro over the last 60 years. Some attacks were indirect, like the way the United States looked the other way when armed mercenaries from Miami exile groups attacked coastal villages there, or when a Cuban exile blew up an airplane in mid-flight, which happened in 1976. And it's in all, it's estimated that about 3,500 people, Cubans, have been killed in direct US attacks. And that includes the Bay of Pigs, which you may have read something about. That would be another worthy topic of study for you. The Bay of Pigs, Playa Girón, refers to the April 1961 invasion of Cuba by a paramilitary force of 1,500 Cuban exiles. So these were people, Batista's people, basically, who left the country and then got trained by the CIA in Nicaragua, and then were equipped by the United States to go back and invade. They thought they would meet with people welcoming them to free them from the revolution, but instead they were met with the riffraff of Cuban military, and they were defeated in 72 hours. So it was a colossal failure for the CIA. And in the months after that, Cuba turned to the USSR, the Soviet Union, for protection against US invasions. And that eventually led to the missile crisis of October 1962, a milestone. In the agreement that ended that crisis, the United States agreed never to invade Cuba again. So here is the billboard right outside. At Playa Girón now, you see a museum to the Bay of Pigs invasion, and a lot of things, plus a beautiful resort on the beach there. But here it says it's the greatest defeat of Yankee imperialism in Latin America was this event. But there, I put that in there because I wanted you also to see the use of the word imperialism a lot in Cuban rhetoric about itself. So the last big section here I have is how it's not that big. How is the revolution remembered today? And I have two contrasting examples to show here. We, in sociology and anthropology, we like to talk about commemorations and memories and remembering the past and what that means to us in the present. So I have, one is a commemoration of the final battle of the revolution, which gives you a little more info about the revolution itself. And the other is a more subtle reminder of to Cubans, really, because you wouldn't know it otherwise, about the victorious rebels, Fidel and Che especially, as they came back into Havana in 1959. So let's talk about the final battle, Santa Clara. This was December 1958, so the month before, when Che Guevara's column of rebels took control of Santa Clara. And by all accounts, it was a stunning victory, a kind of a David and Goliath moment. Batista had sent this train full of armored soldiers, weapons, and ammunition. It left Havana. Santa Clara is a little east of Havana. So it went a little east from Havana to Santa Clara. And there, Che's small and disheveled column of rebels borrowed tractors from farmers in the area, and they managed to bend and twist the train tracks. When the train arrived, it derailed. The soldiers inside surrendered, and the rebels seized the cache of weapons and ammunition inside. Now back in Havana, Batista heard about this outcome, and he packed his bags and left for Miami. And these are some, let's see, do I have more than one picture of the train wreck? That's another picture of the train wreck. And then here's 3 pictures of the monument that has been built there today. So have a look at that with the train tracks sticking up. And that's the monument that you see today. Now, I think this was about maybe 2018 or some that I was there. And this symbolizes the tractor representing the ones that Che borrowed from the farmers. So, yeah, that's another scene from the monument. And then this is a memorial. Nowhere on earth is Che Guevara more sanctified than he is in Santa Clara today. And this is the monument that was built for him in 1988. His remains actually were buried there. They were recovered from Bolivia in 1997, and they were reinterred in this mausoleum here. But the more subtle reminder, you might, if you go to Havana and you look up at the Hotel Havana Libre, you might see it looks like this. And you might have a look, wonder why are these 3 windows different than all the others? Well, these are the three rooms on both sides of the hotel where Che Guevara and Fidel Castro set up their headquarters that January 8th when they marched back into Havana in 1959, victorious. So these were the rooms they used as the headquarters. When the hotel was renovated, in fact, maybe more than once, I'm not sure more than once, but in any renovation, their suites are left untouched. And the anomaly you see in that facade is actually a very understated visual reference to the revolution's victory. And it's very deliberate, as you can see in the next picture. This is a diorama, and even the diorama has these 3 different, this is the back of the building, and it also is visible from this area, this side. So my last, whoops, one more person. Okay, my last, well, not my last slide, my penultimate slide has to do with this is the Jose Marti Anti-Imperialist Plaza in Havana, Cuba. This is right outside the US Embassy, which is here. This was built in 2000 when the Elian Gonzalez crisis was going on. That would be another interesting subject to research. There were constant protests in front of the U.S. Embassy, and this plaza was sort of renovated to host those protests. And here's a statue of Jose Marti holding back a child, as if this was Elian Gonzalez, and these little pylons here, or whatever you might call them, they're oh, I have more. Let's see. Oh. Chat. Okay, is there anybody else waiting to come in? No, I don't think so. Okay. These pylons, they have little plaques to whom they consider anti-imperialists. And it's including North Americans, like Herbert Matthews' name is there, and the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and a lot of other American names. And there's also Caribbean names and European names as well, just celebrating anti-imperialists from all over the world in that struggle. So I will close with this slide of about Cuba and Jamaica. And I think now Jamaica has had its moments of resisting imperialism. And I think one big moment like that was the trying to contain the bauxite industry, for example, in 1974. And the US ruling class hit back very hard against Jamaica. And I think I felt like I learned about this when I was writing my dissertation. I looked at elections, the last one of which was 1980. And that was an election where I saw a lot of United States content as propaganda against the People's National Party and Michael Manley. So there's Michael Manley meeting with Fidel Castro. This is something that really irritated the United States. Okay, so on December 8th, 1972, Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago reopened diplomatic relations with Cuba. And that was another act of defiance against the United States imperialists. And of course, the State Department of the United States did issue a notice right away that they were unhappy with this decision. But ever since 1972, Jamaica has had a very fruitful and I'd say pretty steadily positive relationship with Cuba. What's often mentioned is how many Jamaican students study in Cuban universities, and also how many Cuban medical personnel help out in the Jamaican system. So the last picture here is, of course, the current president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, meeting with your senator, Tavares Finson, president of the Senate, when Diaz-Canel came to visit, I think in 2018, and that's a picture from then. Yeah, that's basically what I have. I'm really interested, maybe you could tell me about your projects or ask me anything you want to about Cuba. I love to talk about Cuba. There's so much that I didn't say in this presentation, of course, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say now. I'm going to stop the share so I can see you guys. Okay, there we go. Well, I can't see you because you're all hiding, but that's okay. So yeah, does anybody have a question? Just unmute yourself and I guess chime in.
I have a question.
Yes.
What were the political conditions like in Cuba?
At what time period are you talking about, Kayana? When they had the revolution?
Anterior to the revolution.
Okay, sure. Well, it was a military dictatorship supported by the United States. It was, there wasn't from 1901 until 1959, there wasn't a leader in Cuba in charge who the United States didn't approve of. The United States had to approve of everybody who was in there. And they approved of people who were going to look out for interests, US interests. So the United States had interest. By US interests, I'm talking about United States capitalist interests like United Fruit and other places like that, other big companies. It was a military dictatorship and people had no basic freedoms and very little services.
Yeah, because I was reading some article and some notes that said that Cuba was referred to as US's playground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, and so what was the political conditions like after the revolution?
Sure. After the revolution, Fidel really stopped people. Well, he closed all the casinos. He closed all the brothels. I read somewhere there were 250 brothels in Havana. So that was all shut down. So all of the people who were, the rich folks They all got on airplanes and went to Miami, and they took everything that they could with them. A lot of medical people left at that time. So a lot of the privileged people left. And the people who were left on the ground, they rallied together. They were so glad to have gotten rid of Batista and his oppression. They were very enthusiastic at first, and there was just a lot of, there was a lot of spirit togetherness. For example, every year of those early years was like 1 year was the year of literacy, and there was a huge literacy campaign. I think that was 1960, where there was like an army of literacy people that, you know, fanned out throughout the country, some of whom were attacked by, you know, U.S. Miami exiles, but they were out there. So so there was socialism. Do you want to put a name to it? It is a more planned economy. People, the early regime, the early revolution, they took away the land from big landowners, including Fidel Castro's father. He had his land taken away from him. And more of that, the benefits of that land were shared by ordinary people. If that answers your question.
Just to piggyback off what you said, you talked about socialism. Mm-hmm. However, accredited historic websites said that Cuba was known for their communism. So are you saying Cuba was more of a socialist state more than a communist state?
That's such an interesting question, Kayana, and one that I love to avoid. I think the words communism and socialism are so often differently defined depending on what people need. I mean, what communism is about is establishing socialist society. So for me, socialism, communism, it's not, I wouldn't say it was a communist country because it's not fully, I don't know, I don't like to even think about, you know, what defines those differences. I know that in Cuba, it's I say it's a socialist country, or it's fighting for socialism, because it's attempting to make the workers, the vast majority of the working class, the people who are really in control of what's going on in that country.
Okay, good morning. I have a question.
1 second before you go on to ask the question. Just my personal experience in Cuba. Mm-hmm. When I last December, the previous cohort of students went to Cuba, and a student actually asked the question if Cuba was a communist country. The tour guide took offense
they asked
to the question.
Communist country?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And she took offense to the question, and she said, Cuba we have no problem with communism. Communism is the theory. However, socialism is the practice, and we're a socialist country, and I found it very, very intriguing, and I understand where she's coming from. Yes. Because in reality, they are different. If I'm going to put a spin on communism and socialism, right? I would say you have socially the root. The tree root is communism, but the different branches, you have very different strands of socialism that emanates from that tree of communism. I wonder if I'm explaining it properly so you could understand, students. So, for example, the People's National Party in Jamaica practiced what at the time, in its beginning, what they usually call Fabian socialism, which is very, very popular which was very popular in the United Kingdom at the time, more so in London. You have in Russia, you have several different practice of socialism in Russia. So it's not only one type of socialism, and also the Chinese version of socialism is very much different from the Russian, the Cuban, and also what is currently practiced in Venezuela, or what was attempted in Jamaica during the 1970s. Because we just had a recent election in Jamaica, and students, you would have heard the term over and over again about democratic socialism, which is something that was practiced in Jamaica during the 1970s. Interestingly, students, that last night on a current affair program, the question was asked, what was the ideological differences between the PMP and the Jamaica Labour Party? And the commentators said, listen, there are really no ideological differences. Historically, they had a difference, but currently, there is no difference. And we need to ask ourselves the question, and I don't want you as my student, no student should leave my class thinking that socialism and communism, they are bad words. Okay, ladies, they are not bad words. They are different ideas and practices that is focused on the people, how to better people's life. People is the center of development, and not big businesses, which is more of a capitalist outlook. All right, over to you, Anita, and the
That
students.
sounds so good. I really appreciate both. I'm going to steal that. Communism is the theory, socialism is the practice. I'm going to steal that because it's a nice easy answer. But I really like that. I mean, what you stressed is the human needs. You know, that's what socialism tries to fulfill, people's human needs and make, you know, give. Okay, Kayana raised your hand. Go ahead. You have to unmute, yeah.
So, since we're on the topic of politics and the conditions in Cuba, were there any political reforms? And if so, what were they? Do you know what they were?
Oh, the Cuban Revolution was a revolution, not just a reform. I mean, they changed. They took away, you know, big private property. They took away people's, large homes from people. You know, it was everything. All the reform. I mean, everything changed. That whole. I mean, those systems, those economic systems are the relationship among classes, and those relationships among classes changed. And that's why we call it a revolution, because there was something that class structure changed. I think, Kristen, did you have your hand up too, or did you unmute yourself earlier?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of political reforms, the system of government changes what you're saying. That's the political reform.
Yes, the political system changed, how they elect people. They do have a very robust democracy. It's different than the kind of democracy that we have in the United States or Jamaica, because it really does involve a lot of different organizations coming in and being represented. So it's quite a different. It's very complex. They have a new constitution that they just approved last year, and that made some changes in the constitution as well. So okay, I have Kalisha. Oops, sorry, I muted you. Then unmute yourself if you can. There you go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Alicia.
Kalisha, okay. Kalisha,
Okay.
what? Say it again, Kalisha.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
that's okay. My question is, do you think that Cuba has benefited from the political, well, not just political reform, but do you think Cuba has benefited from the new way everything is being handled? I wouldn't want to say communist or socialist state, because what was discussed before, but do you think Cuba has benefited from the reform?
Right, that's an excellent question. Thank you. Yeah, I think there have been a lot of costs. As I said, there have been these attacks from the United States, and the embargo that the United States has imposed. But at the same time, Cuba has, first of all, it has an amazing healthcare system. They're really good at supplying healthcare and education to the people for free. So if you look at I actually published an article not too long ago that does make some comparisons between Jamaican statistics and Cuban statistics. And I think the Cuban infant death rate was like 4 per 100,000 or something like that. And then the whatever it was 4 for Cuba and it was 12 for Jamaica. There was another statistic that I looked at, and this is something we're really, in the United States, we're really struggling with Black Lives Matter and racist police violence. And it always struck me how police violence is such an expanded problem in Jamaica. And in Cuba, I tried to find some comparisons. I found maybe one out of the last 20 or 30 years instance of a Cuban law enforcement person or army person shooting to kill and shooting a Cuban civilian. One. And whereas, as you know, the United States has a lot of police killings, and Jamaica has 10 the rate of police killings in Jamaica is 10 for every one we have in the United States. So it's a big problem there. And that's something that kind of violence to reinforce the ordinary social order is something that really is very different from Jamaica to Cuba. And I think it is because they have resisted imperialism. They don't have the brothels. They don't have the big capitalists spending a lot of money and buying people off and that kind of thing. So they don't have the corruption of big money, and that really helps. So their education system's excellent. Their healthcare system, the results of their healthcare system is great. I think it's a happier society, honestly, because it is safer. They've protected a lot in the COVID-19 days. They've done a pretty good job. I have friends there. You probably know Ileana Sanz too. She used to teach English literature, including Caribbean literature, especially Caribbean literature at University of Havana. She and her 92-year-old husband live in Havana, in the city, and she told me that medical students visit her almost every day, just to make sure they're okay and to see if there's anything they need. They really are taken care of. Their citizens are taken care of there, to the extent that Cuba can do it, because Cuba doesn't have a lot of resources, but what it has, it makes available to people. Reduces inequality is what I'm trying to say. Good question though, thanks. Carol?
I have a question in terms of do you have any recommendations for external readings where you could go and find out more on the Cuban Revolution from other person's standpoint, maybe somebody who either is from Cuba or somebody like yourself who isn't from Cuba, so different points of views of the Cuban Revolution from? Do you have any recommendations for external readings?
Sure. Okay, good question. Well, I recommended Isaac Saney's book, Saney. But now I can't remember the name of that book off the top of my head. I would just poke around and see if you have access. I find what's really interesting is to look back in history. I have access to a New York Times archive. So for example, when I found that Herbert Matthews quote, I was looking at 1972 and how did the United States respond to Jamaica establishing diplomatic relations with Cuba? And one of the things I found there was, there was 4 bombings of businesses in New York, Miami, and Montreal that sent packages to Cuba. So if you sent packages to Cuba, your business was going to get bombed by these Miami exile groups. All 4 bombs went off at the same time, even though they were in 3 different cities. And that kind of bombing happened a lot in that period of time. So how did I get started on that? But I hope that answers your question. I don't know.
And also, thank you very much, Anita, but just also to add when it comes to Cuba, okay, when we enter Cuba, it it seems as if it was quite militarized at the airport. So it was very different from entering Norman Manley or even Bridgetown. It seems like there was a lot of, they had way more immigration officers and customs compared to what we have in Kingston. However, ladies, once you leave the airport and you go into Cuba and you go around Havana, you will not see a police officer with a gun. It is compared to Kingston. Once you leave the airport and you go outside Kingston, you see all these military officials. You drive along the highways, you see police car, the soldier jeeps, and all of these different stuff, which kind of brings some level of fear. Remind me when I go to Guatemala, it was so security issues in Guatemala. Everywhere you go, even the restaurants, the security guards at the restaurants had some very high-powered rifles. And I'm saying, why you have high-powered rifles at a restaurant, for example, KFC? And he said to me that we have some serious security issues here. Jamaica has a lot of security issues. We know for sure that Jamaica has a lot of security issues when it comes to crime. And in Cuba, that is not the case. Another thing, so that is one of the plus of the revolution, the drastic change in Cuba, where we see for sure, ladies, that the Cuban people, they have a security benefit because their ports are well protected. Our ports in Jamaica, they are not well protected. There's a lot of avenue for illegal guns to come in from the United States via Haiti. Cuba, it's well protected. So there's not a lot of crime. For example, as the girls, when we took the students to Cuba in December, they actually went on the road after 11. I was very scared because I'm saying I have students and they're under my control. And at 11 a.m. in the night, 11 p.m. in the night, the girls are saying to me, Mr. Hall, I'm hungry. I need to go and get something to eat. And I said, all right, come, let us go and get food. All right. And it was pretty safe on the road at 11 p.m. We will not try that in Kingston. For me, personally, I try to get in by 6. I don't stay on the road beyond 6. And so I believe that is one of the benefits of the Cuban Revolution. The security, they have some level of social cohesion there. We don't have that in Jamaica. All right, any other questions? And over to you,
has her
Anita.
hand up. Tayana?
Yes, so my question is, you were talking about some social problems that they face. Were there any economic problems that they're facing in Cuba, as in terms of export? What do they export? What do they import? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. You're talking about now then, right? Now. I mean, current day.
Yeah, current day and like, you know, a couple years after the revolution, after Fidel would have situated and, you know, start getting things going.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. Yeah, they did keep on exporting. They were a big sugar producer and they kept on exporting sugar. Of course, they do produce the best rum in the world. I don't know whether a Jamaican would be unhappy to hear that, but that's exported to a lot of countries. But because the United States embargo makes it very, very difficult. If a ship has docked in Havana or anywhere in Cuba, and it cannot visit the United States again for 180 days, so it has to stay away for 6 months. So that's a big logistical nightmare for importers and exporters. So it's difficult, and European countries are sanctioned too if they do business with Cuba. So the United States is really draconian when it comes to its anti-Cuban policies, and that's another thing that people have been trying to explain, because it's really a tiny exile community in Miami that is dictating this policy, and we just have entrenched ourselves into it in 1961, and we can't seem to get out. So a lot of people in the United States would like to open up relationships with Cuba. But as far as what else it exports now, I think well, sugar products, of course, and then there's some minerals, I think, that are produced. Cuba has a huge tourist industry too, not in 2020, unfortunately, but it has along the north coast there are these really luxury resorts on the north coast of Cuba. They're very expensive, and as a result, they bring in a lot of foreign exchange, especially from Canadians and Europeans, and maybe people from Asia too. I'm not really sure at this point who the market is. So that's how they make their foreign exchange, basically. And then there's a lot of subsistence farming or really good environmental, because they lost a lot of resources when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 92, or 89, or wherever that was. And they really had to fend for themselves, really figure out how to make things work. And you still see a lot of fields getting plowed by oxen there. So there's a sort of return to organic farming by necessity, but that's something that is really internationally known. Does that answer your question? You said something about social problems. I do want to add to what O'Neill said. They do have pickpockets in Cuba, and I think you're safe whenever you're talking to people on the street at any hour of the day. But if you're carrying something really valuable on the bus, keep an eye on it. That's but that kind of thing does happen.
Okay, all right, thank you. Two questions. Well, actually more than two, but two for now, two. You're talking about exporting sugar and stuff. Was there a program that was used to distribute the food? One, and two, apart from exporting, was there any other economic growth that Fidel Castro that Cuba saw under the guidance of Fidel Castro?
Sure. Okay. Economic growth. Well, let me talk about that food program. You may have seen a little card. I can't remember what they're called now. That everybody gets it's called a ration card, but it's not like things are. It's what you can get for pennies. If you're a Cuban and you have 4 people in your household, you get this tarjeta, and you can go down to the place where they're distributing vegetables and meat and oil and things like that, and you can get dirt cheap the necessities for a household. So even if you're not even working, even if you're not employed, you still have this access to a card, and you can use it. So there is that food distribution system. It's not always very effective or efficient. People get food, it's not always exactly what they want, or things aren't available. My friend Ileana is always complaining that she has to go here, and they have chicken one day, and then the next day they don't have chicken, and they have to go somewhere else for something else. So, but that's part of the neighborhood gossip, is you talk about what's available where and what you can have. So there was a lot of attention to distributing food and making sure that, for example, pregnant women and young children have access to really extra good food, and exporting sugar, there's actually, as I said, a lot of attention now to sustainable farming and crops. Any other questions?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
All right, so you were, Sarah was talking about the I mean, you answer, we're talking about the elections under the leadership of Fidel Castro. Now, many historians say that even though Fidel Castro was a good person, or well, a good addition to Cuba, he was somewhat of a dictator, because after successfully overthrowing Batista, he really put a decrease on the elections, right? And so my question is, even though, I'm sorry, he put a, there was a decrease in elections, as well as any group who tried to, you know, go against it, they were imprisoned and stuff like that. So my question is, even through all of this, after his death, was the rules on election, was it loosened?
I don't think the election process has changed, and there was, those decisions were made in 2018, 2019, when they were ratifying their constitution. There were decisions that were made then. Should we really loosen up the economic situation and let private owners take more and more of the profits? And they really held back on that, and they also held back on changing. I think they really didn't change election systems too much. Now, there is a National Assembly, and I can't off the top of my head tell you exactly how that goes, but there's a National Assembly, and the people in that assembly are chosen, but not through one of these one person, one vote things that we have in Jamaica and the United States, which are susceptible to interference. And I think that's one of the reasons why Cuba has such strong security at the airport, and such tight restrictions on like a group coming in, because that's how the IRI, the groups from the United States, CIA basically, that's the way they do. They go to Venezuela, for example, they groom a woman candidate who really looks good and can talk the talk, and then they give her resources and set her before the electorate with all these advantages, and then also drum up support from her for her. Then they have their person in power. So that's how they operate. And Cuba is determined not to let the United States take over their revolution. They're really holding back. And I think sometimes maybe throughout their history, they have made mistakes, and they may have gone too far. And I think they have, in the past maybe 10 years where I've really studied it, they seem more happy to just expel people who are hopelessly want to overthrow the revolution. And they do, the State Department, the US State Department sometimes sponsors these demonstrations against Cuba. And people are rounded up and arrested, and then usually let go, by the end of the day or something. They don't want to support them. They don't want to have to deal with them, with keeping them. But they do put a stop to those kind of anti-Cuban demonstrations, which are often, perpetrated and supported by the United States government directly.
Okay, all right. So I have one last question and one last statement. To what extent did the measures that Fidel Castro adopt, were they effective in consolidating the Cuban Revolution? To what extent would you say? Yeah.
I'd say they were extremely effective. He was very supported, in all those years, and until he died, basically. I think people loved Fidel Castro, and he would come out and give speeches. His speeches were 5 and 6 hours long. People would be enduring that in the heat. They love Fidel. So that's why they trusted Raul to take over. Raul was part of that Moncada Barracks attack too. So I think it really worked hard. I mean, he, as a charismatic leader, if you've read your Max Weber yet. You're a character. He had a lot of charisma, and of course Diaz-Canel maybe not so much, but that's okay. The revolution is established now. So yeah, Fidel was beloved by people.
Okay. Okay, so in regards to my topic, I know that he did a lot of stuff that helped Cubans grow. And you said he helped with the rationing. It was more beneficial. Well, it wasn't beneficial to everybody, but sometimes majority rules, as well as healthcare and education. So we're apart from that. Was there any other way that we can say, because of Fidel, this worked, or we're good here? Was there any other way apart from those? Because those are the major ones that everybody knows.
Sure. While there's land reform is a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think rights for women eventually. I think, they got over their machismo, although I think in Cuba, well, I don't know whether women don't have equal rights anywhere, it seems. But also in terms of race relations in Cuba, you saw that picture of Fulgencio Batista and his folks. There was a lot of privilege for white Cubans, and a lot of that period of time from 1901 with the Platt Amendment until 1959, there was a deliberate policy, supported by the United States, of getting more white people into Cuba. So there were a lot of immigrants came in from Spain in that period of time, including Fidel's father, Angel Castro. He came from Galicia back in those days. So he was really, Fidel was a first generation Cuban on that side. His mother was a Cuban though. So there was, I think there's been real change there. The Miami exiles who left Cuba after the revolution because they were going to have no more rights, or they were going to have their money taken away from them. They were basically white Cubans that had been in control of everything beforehand. So the country that they left behind is more Afro-Cuban, and so is the government really of Cuba.
Okay, I just have a statement. In your honest opinion, the United States has been involved in so much stuff, throughout history. They've been in World War I, which had to do with Europe, not with North America. They've been involved in the Cuban War, in Cuba, a whole country that has nothing to do with them. But they recognize the shortcomings of others, but fail to realize what's going on in their own homeland. Let's talk about how United States is on native land. They ran the natives off the land and took it for themselves.
Yes, you're preaching to the choir, Kayana. I'm totally in agreement with you. And what we're talking about there is imperialism. They don't care. They don't care. Are they bad? What they're doing is just, seeking raw materials, cheap labor, and places to sell their goods. They're not interested in providing for human needs. And we're really reaching a crisis of it right now in the United States, as you know. I mean, we're all going absolutely crazy for the next 8 weeks or so until we have our elections. So hopefully hopefully this is, I think, I'm optimistic, and I like to think that what's going on in the United States right now is its low point, and hopefully we'll be able to come back a little bit better from this. And I think our current president is just as low as you can possibly get. He's a con man and a crook, basically. So
Preach, sister.
Quote me on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, because
You're preaching to a choir that already knows the message. You need to go preach to people who are not aware of it.
Right, because I mean, as a president, me, I am no American. I'm not in anywhere form from America, but I can't help but see that as a president, I think you should be able to recognize what your people are going through. I mean, he can't even talk on the fact that the police fired 7 shots into an unarmed man, right? He posed no threat because his back, they're in the police academy, you're trained that once a suspect's back is towards you, he can pose no threat because he can't shoot through his back. And so I thought that was very, 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 very rude and unkempt of him to not say anything about that. And he knows what is going on with the Black Lives Matter, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. The killing of George Floyd, the killing of the other young black man who in the Wendy's drive-through, you know, throughout the years, I think America has turned a blind eye to their own problems and shoved their nose in everybody else's problems. Why is America trying to interfere in Jamaica's election? For what?
Oh, and not just beginning to do that. Jamaica, I mean, U.S. has interfered with Jamaican elections since 1962, I guess. I don't know. But Kristen has her hand up too.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you give me an insight on what the education system was like at the time of Batista's rule?
Well, there was private schools in the big cities. I think Fidel's father, for example, was a farmer, as I mentioned. He had people working for him. He had a property, and he sent his son to live with somebody else so that he could go to a school in town, I think in Santiago de Cuba. And then he went to a religious school. So there were, you know, the Jesuits had schools there. So there were some private schools for the elite, for the people who had money, who could afford big fees and who could afford to be out of the labor force. But the vast majority of Cubans out in the rural areas, they had no opportunity even to go to school. I mean, maybe they had rudimentary, you know, education, but illiteracy was really rampant at the time. I don't know the exact number, but it's like in the 80s or 90s or something out in the countryside of people could not read or write. And that was the biggest, that was the big first effort. The literacy program, it was called Si Se Puede, you know, and we still see this. I think Si Se Puede programs are throughout Latin America now, and how to teach Spanish-speaking people how to read and write. So yeah, education was a real problem. And of course, the people who could go on to tertiary education were even fewer and farther between. But now tertiary education, if you qualify and you have done all the work that you need to do, you can do that for free as well. And another thing that they have in Cuba, which I think is great, is they really pay attention to their youth in elementary school. And if a young person, for example, shows a big aptitude and inclination for music, they can go into one of the music schools. And Caribbean, I didn't mention this, but Caribbean arts are amazing. They're visual art, their music, dance, ballet. They do some phenomenal productions. I had the opportunity to go to a ballet last time I was in Cuba. It was wonderful, and of course very inexpensive. Almost cost nothing for ordinary Cubans to go in there. There's a price for tourists, but that's okay. They have to get our foreign exchange out of us while we're there. So it was really, they're really very productive that way. And if you're, you know, I met some reggae musicians in Cuba that Samuel Davis Foray gave me their number, or introduced me to them. And they have a little band, and whenever a a public gathering wants some music, and they can call the Department of Music, basically, the Institute of Music or whatever, and say, we want reggae music. And then they get this band can come out and they get paid. Now they get supported by the government all the time. They don't have to have a gig just to be supported. So there is a lot more freedom there for people to not be tied to corporations. In the United States, if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance, and it's really a scary thing because health care is so expensive here, and of course not very effective, unfortunately. So I think, you know, there's that freedom from having to pay for your health care and having to find food for your everyday subsistence. Having that freedom is amazing for Cuban creativity. I mean, yes, creativity and production in the arts. So I would, I hope you all go to Cuba, take the opportunity, and do visit the contemporary art museums. And of course, you won't be able to miss contemporary Cuban music because it's everywhere. So I recommend that too. Any other? Kristen, do you have your hand up still, or do you have another?
Oh no, I'm done. I need to take it back now.
All right. Okay, any other? O'Neill, turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Cariella?
What is the word I can use to describe today's presentation? It was so wonderful, but I don't think wonderful truly encompasses what it was, you know? For now, I'll just say splendidiously splendid. Thank you so much for this truly enriching presentation. It has just been as enriching as it has been educational. Miss Waters, you are clearly an overflowing fountain of knowledge, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Caribbean History 2020 cohort from the St. Andrew High School for Girls for just coming to dose us in a little bit of your knowledge of the Cuban Revolution and most importantly Cuba. I don't feel like I need to go to Cuba anymore because you've given me a visual tour of Cuba. I can explain to somebody who's never been to Cuba what Cuba looks like thanks to you. So I can guarantee that based on your presentation, the ladies that are tackling the theme of Cuban Revolution have been armed with the knowledge and resources to face it head on. Again, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to share with us. Separate and apart from that, I'd also like to thank Mr. O'Neill Hall for organizing this presentation as well as last week's presentation with Professor Matthew Smith. This has certainly aided us in doing our research papers, and we'd like to say thank you to Sir for going out of his way to communicate with both persons who have been just as enriching and as educational as people can be in this COVID pandemic. So we really want to say thank you, sir, because we truly do appreciate all that you've done for us with this SBA. I don't think any of us can get less than a 2, well, not a 2, a 1 in our exams in June, because you just come and fling all of the knowledge on us and all the resources. We can't fail, sir. We can't fail. So thank you very much again to Ms.
That's very good to know.
Yes, thank you so much, Carol. It's been an honor for me to talk to St. Andrew High School for Girls. It's a school I've known the reputation of for a long time. You're a wonderful group. I wish you all the best of luck in your projects, and yeah, look forward to hearing from O'Neill how you're doing. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, ladies, bye. See you in class on Monday, 9 to 10.
Sir,
Sir, what up?
sir.
Hold up. Sir, we don't get timetables yet, you know, so how you tell we when we off class? Them don't know what time off class.
We didn't get a timetable yet.
It's 9 to 10 on Monday.
Sir, 9 to 10.
Sir, what? You don't even have a timetable. What is going on?
Exactly.
I will send you the time for my classes.
Sir, not me waking up at 9 o'clock.
No, your class is actually going to start from 8.
About 8 to 9 class.
Oh my days. What is going on here?
I know you lying.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye, sir.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Miss
Thank
Watson.
Thank you very much, Anita.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me, O'Neill. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.